Okay, so I had a cool idea for like a new series where I run through some years of the earlier years of prog. I'm probably gonna do another series of like the modern prog years, but for the first like half of this series I'm going to be exclusively talking about the 70s. So I'm going to be talking about the years 1970 to about 76, 75 maybe. But I'm just going to be running through my favourite albums of those years that are progressive rock, basically. Just a quick side note, if there's an album that you like that's from a certain year and I haven't put it in my list, it's probably because I've never listened to it. Like, I've probably heard of it, but I've just not listened to it yet. And I think that the person who sent me the book, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, is a big help because there's so many albums from all these years I'm going to be talking about that I've never heard of and have a chance to discover. So with that being said, today's video is going to be on the year 1973, which a lot of people deem as like the best year for prog. It's usually a tie between 1973 and 1972, but I'm indifferent at the moment. I'll probably mention when I talk about 1972 which one I prefer, but I've got a pile of records here to talk about and just explain why they're my favourites. And yeah, so today, as I said, 1973, let's go. So I used this book to help me with my list because there were a lot that I forgot about and some that I didn't know were released in 1973. So I've made a lot of tabs and I've picked out the ones that I like the most from my collection at the moment. So I think we should just start. These are all going to be in chronological order of when they were released. Like, that's not intentional, that's just the way I followed the book. But these are just my personal favourites of the year. My personal favourites that I've heard so far. I have to keep stressing this because I know a lot of people will be commenting, where's this album, where's that album? It's probably because I've not had the chance to listen to it yet or just not heard of it. Straight up, just not heard of it. So to start the year off, I have Rick Wakeman's 6 Wives of Henry VIII. This is one that I impulsively bought a while ago because I knew who Rick Wakeman was, I knew he played with Yes, and I started diving into artists' solo stuff outside of their groups, and as someone who used to play piano, this intrigued me quite a lot because, I mean, look at the cover, it looks pretty medievally, and it's talking about, you know, the Tudor era of England, and that was something that always interested me. And the way that the story flows about each wife through music is absolutely brilliant. I love it so much. Absolutely great piano player and keyboards player. I love all the musical arrangements on this record. And if it's one that you've not heard yet, maybe you've heard Journey to the Centre of the Earth. If you have not heard this one, I really recommend listening to this one because it's absolutely great. I believe actually he got some of the Yes guys to help out on this album. So there's a little fact for you there. Next up is one that I haven't really spoken about on my channel yet because I always forget to, because it's in our downstairs half of the collection. So this is Green Slade. Now, this came out in 1973, as you know. This is a great record that I hadn't heard of until my dad told me about it. So this is quite a under the radar record. Absolutely great prog here, great British prog. Great musical arrangements, great musicians, great music. I love it. This looks like it was designed by Roger Dean, I think, the cover, from just the style of art, so that's always brilliant as well. But this is a great record, one that if you're into the British 70s prog scene and you haven't checked Green Slade out yet, they're a great group and I highly recommend it. Aha. Larks, Tongues and Aspic by King Crimson, absolutely great record. This is one that was very much a grower on me, because when I first heard it, the album before that I heard was In the Court of the Crimson King, so that was my first introduction to King Crimson, and I loved that record, so I decided to delve deeper into their discography, and I listened to Red, I think, before this one, and I loved Red. And then I heard this one and I wasn't really much of a fan of it because I was like, this is just so weird. At that time I didn't really like things that were too out there, too strange, and the percussion sections at the beginning of the first track, basically the beginning of the album, just confused me so much. I was like, when is the song gonna start? That was very closed-minded Neve talking there. But as I listened to this more, as I've gotten more and more into prog, more into experimental music, I've grown to absolutely love this record, and I think records that grow on you usually end up sticking with you the most, and this one's really stuck with me. I love this record so much. I actually thought this was in 72, which is really weird, so I'm going to shove this one in here. And my favourite tracks on here are probably Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 1 and Exiles as well. Both brilliant tracks, and if you've probably seen the cover of this, but if you've not listened to it and want to get into King Crimson's discography, I wouldn't start with this one because you might be a bit put out, especially if you're getting into prog. So if you're going to get into King Crimson, I'd start at the beginning. But this is a great record. This is a great prog classic. Robert Fripp and everyone else, I think. Yeah, so this is the first record with the John Wetton, David Cross, Bill Bruford lineup. So I think that's probably my favourite era of King Crimson, so obviously I'm going to love this record if it's got those guys on it. And yes, give it a listen. Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield, one of the first longer albums that I listened to. Like Thick as a Brick, this is part 1 and 2. It's got 2 parts, and I recommend listening to it all at once, just the whole 48 minutes of it. This is one of my favourite albums of all time. I think the first time I heard it again, I didn't really catch on to it because it was so long, and it was instrumental. And at that time, I'd not really been put in a situation where I'd listened to much instrumental music. So listening to this was very much an eye-opener for me. And the fact that he was so young and played all the instruments on this record just drew me in instantly as well, because as someone who's younger and trying to, you know, make my own way through the music industry, this kind of has that kind of space in my heart as well. I mean, his career started with such an explosive album. What an incredible debut album this, and I think it really did kick off Richard Branson's career in the record business and for what it became. Now he's a multi-millionaire at this point. But this is a great debut album. I mean, for someone who was so young at the time as well. I mean, if you've not heard of this, which is, I'd be very, very surprised if you've never heard of Tubular Bells or Mike Oldfield's work in general. This was featured in The Exorcist. Parts of Tubular Bells were featured in the horror film in the 70s called The Exorcist. And absolutely brilliant record. Especially the build up to the end of the first part. I've actually learned that on bass. But brilliant musicianship, classic record, one that everyone should be having in their collection, as well as On the Dawn, which is, I'll mention probably in another video. But this is great, and I highly recommend it if you are getting into prog and don't know where to start, or maybe getting into instrumental music. This is a great place to start. Selling England by the Pound by Genesis, probably the most English album you'll probably see on this list. Very British, and I do like that a lot. This is a very beautiful album. In comparison to their previous work, things like Foxtrot with Supper's Ready and Nursery Crime and even Trespass, this is very much delicate. More delicate than all of those albums, especially if you compare it to Nursery Crime, because Nursery Crime's got some quite hard-hitting moments, like where it's quite loud, quite, you know, I don't know how to explain it, just quite loud and quite explosive, I guess you could say. This is very much calmer, more beautiful, very melodic, very just incredible, very atmospheric, especially the first side, which is probably my favourite side of the record. I just love the theatrics in this album so much. You know, as I said, I like watching the live performance, and they still got a lot of theatrical moments in this record. I think it was kind of started with the release of Supper's Ready, with all the different sections and all the different parts with all the different costumes, all the different voices, all that kind of stuff, which I actually love, which is featured quite a bit in this album, so there's a lot of theatrics in there, and I think you can tell from this I'm very much more of a Peter Gabriel Genesis fan than I am a Phil Collins Genesis fan, but I will talk about that in a different video. And the intro to this album, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, just, it pulled me in instantly. I love watching the live footage of songs from this album, and this one is one that I'm quite late to, because I was obsessed with Nursery Crime for about a month and I listened to nothing but Nursery Crime, and then I just didn't listen to any more Genesis. And then when I finally got round to listening to this, because I got this for my birthday, I think last year, the vinyl version, I I just listened to it and I was like, why have I just not listened to this yet? And just a great record. And if you like that side, that more British music-y side, the very English sounding medieval music, then this is one to get into. If you like Genesis's kind of quieter moments in music, then this one is a great one to check out, and one that I would probably give to someone who wants to get into prog but doesn't know where to start. So this is a great one to start with. Brain Salad Surgery by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I've got the poster up there. That was the first ELP poster I got. I love the vinyl for this. I think I mentioned this in my favourite album covers video. I do love the way that this opens out. It's very cool, and I like that. But this is one that I remember the story of when I listened to it. So I remember the first time I heard it, it was almost like in one of those nights where you just don't know how to sleep. Like, you're not tired at all and you're up. So what do I do usually when I'm up that late? I usually will find an album and listen to it. So I did, and I picked Brain Salad Surgery because I was getting back into Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I'd heard Tarkus, I heard Trilogy, I heard the first record, the debut, and I wanted to hear more. And I really was drawn in by this cover because I thought it was a very cool cover. And gave it a listen, and I thought, wow, I need to buy this. So I got it and put it on the turntable, and I was absolutely mesmerised because it sounds so much better on vinyl. Carnival 9 is probably one of the best pieces of music ever. I think that there's just so much variation in that piece, so much, wow, so much to pick out from it, so much going on at once, great instrumentation throughout the whole album. Just, I don't know how to describe it, but listen to it, because it's one of those albums that you have to listen to understand where I'm coming from. And this is probably one that I wouldn't start with if I was getting into prog because of Carnival 9, you know, being a very long piece of music, and if someone was put in a situation where they didn't know anything about prog and listened to it, they probably wouldn't be as intrigued to listen to it. But I think this is some of the band's greatest work. I like how in the live albums they're actually able to adapt it into a live form, which is great, because I love hearing live versions of songs, and they played the whole of Carnival 9 on that Welcome Back My Friends to Show That Never Ends live album from 1974, and just an incredible record, one that I would put in my, I think I put it as number 3 or number 2 in my ranking list of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but this is great. I especially love Carl Palmer's drumming on this record. It's very much noteworthy for me, and the keyboard work in Carnival 9, of course. Coming to the end of the list, I've got 2 left. This one is a new discovery for me. When I say new, I mean late 2020, so about a couple of months ago. And obviously I was a fan of, so this is Fripp and Eno's No Pussyfooting, so it's Robert Fripp and Brian Eno. And I had listened to King Crimson a lot, so I decided to see who Robert Fripp has worked with outside of King Crimson, because it seemed that he'd worked with a lot of musicians who were in King Crimson as well. So I thought, well, who's this guy worked with? And he happened to have worked with Brian Eno, who's a very fantastic musician. So I gave this album a listen, and I just sat there. I was wearing headphones at the time, and this was before I had the vinyl version. Sat there completely immersed in the music. This is such a beautiful and delicate record that very much the opposite of King Crimson. So think King Crimson at their most chaotic and dark, and just think of the complete opposite. Just ambient, reverberated echoes. So much great stuff in this record. Very well produced as well. Of course, I think Brian Eno produced this record, so of course it was going to be good. And if you really like your electronic music and you like just long pieces of no lyrics or anything like that, which is just instrumental, give this a try. Really do, because I think you'll love it. If you're a fan of Robert Fripp, if you're a fan of Brian Eno, listen to this record. This is a great record, and one that that a lot of King Crimson fans should give a try, because it's very good. I do love it a lot. Very ambient, and I listened to it like when I'm going to sleep. Sometimes I listen to it when I go to sleep. I like to listen to music before I go to bed, and it just puts you in that very calm state of mind. And it's just 2 sides of music, it's just 2 tracks, and it's just absolutely fantastic. So give it a listen. And last but not least, we have Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. I actually watched a Yes documentary yesterday. I think it was going through the early years of Yes, from when they started up until Relaya, up till the end of that. So they didn't mention anything post 1974. But this is a great record. Funnily enough, one of the first Yes albums I listened to, and I was blown away. Despite the fact that I wasn't very into my long music, I was blown away by the complexity and beautifulness of this record. I mean, the first side of the album, the first track, which I believe is The Revealing Science of God, Dance of Dawn, that pulled me in instantly, and it's been my favourite track on the album since. And I hear a lot of differing opinions about this album. A lot of people don't like it, a lot of people think it's pretentious, a lot of people think it's long and drawn out. And I know that a lot of the critics didn't like it very much, but I love this record. It's just 4 tracks of Yes, long Yes tracks, which is very much something I love. Great instrumentation, great, just very well put together, very much a progressive rock album, progressive rock structure, and I like the long instrumentals, and I like the way that John Anderson's vocals were produced on this record. I think they were very good, very crisp and clean. But this is a Stephen Wilson remix, so that's why the cover looks a little bit different to the original, which I do have in here somewhere. So this is the original one, and I kept both because I listened to them side by side, you know. So, but I do love this record. I do love the Stephen Wilson remixes as well. If you haven't given them a listen, they're on Spotify. Or you can get the box set where this is from. And I highly recommend this record to any Yes fans who want to hear longer Yes tracks, who want to hear more of the group, and not that they haven't got any long songs as it is. I mean, Close to the Edge is about 18 minutes. But just for like a whole hour of Yes, pretty much, this is your record. Give it a listen. So that is the end of the video. My throat really hurts because every time I go off on a long chat, it seems to hurt a little bit and start to strain, which you can probably hear towards the end of when I was talking about Tales from Topographic Oceans. But I hope this video has given you some new records to listen to, an insight into what I'm listening to at the moment. Again, if something's not on the list that you were hoping was on the was going to be on the list, I'm very sorry. Again, I only really reignited my love of prog a couple of months ago, probably up to about 3 or 4 months ago, so I'm only just getting into the lesser known prog bands at the moment. But this book that I've got will hopefully change that. But tomorrow's video is... There is going to be no video tomorrow. I'm going to be writing up my review. Wednesday's review this week is the Emerson, Lake and Powell album from the 1980s. So we're taking a break from the 70s and moving into 80s prog, which will be interesting because I know a lot of people have differing opinions on the progressive rock scene in the 80s. And yeah, I guess I'll see you all on Wednesday with my review. Bye bye.